hear anything.
It says we're live, Dr. Kimberly.
What? Oh no.
Oh no.
Come on, y'all, it's time.
Come on, let's go. Let's do it.
Rolling on the road with the doc. Rolling on the road with Dave. Rolling on the road with the doc. 100 shades of diversibility with Dave and Dr. Fantastic.
All right. That was cool. Yeah. That was nice.
And good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, May 4th. So if you are watching at GRTV 25, we want you to know that today is Tuesday, May 4th, 2024. And we have as our guest Enid Gaddis. She is an African-American woman, and she has braids in her hair that are flowing down to her shoulders. They're beautifully cascading down. And she has on a black top with a white background. And we have good old Dave Bukowski. We know Pastor Dave. He's got the ponytail back, and he's got his wonderful glasses, and he's trying to hide his smile, but he has on a turquoise type top. He also has a white type background. And you know me, I am in my signature color, glasses, glitter, and all. So we are just really excited to be here. And I'm just going to say, I have had the most difficult time with scheduling with Miss Enid. And so I want to publicly apologize. I kept getting the days wrong, the time wrong, and I'm just been off. So I can either blame it on the stroke, I can blame it on a heart attack, I can blame it on surgeries.
Blame it on the sidekick. You know, that's what sidekicks are for. Right? You know?
We just I just had surgery, what about a few weeks ago, and then this was my 1-year anniversary of my heart attack and my husband's death. So, I'm just all over. Yeah.
But it's Tuesday. It must be 4:00. You're rolling on the road.
We are rolling. I was excited to say today, I try to switch things up a little bit and say, hey, we have Enid Gaddis. She is rolling with Dave and I today. And we're actually in Grand Rapids today. We are. We've been all over from the East Coast to the West Coast. To Nigeria, all the way over, to Sweden. And so, but today we are excited to be here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And for those of you, here we go, Dave, we're ready. Now we are right here. This is where we are today. And we are proud and excited. How are you today?
It's, it's juggling the chainsaws, right?
Always. How are you, Miss Enid?
I am well, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
You have such a big title, and it's scrolling across the bottom. And you know what? I always tell nobody can tell your story better than you can.
This is true.
So if you don't mind telling us, what do you do at Arbor Circle, and what does that mean to be the diversity, equity, and inclusion person?
Sure. So I am the director of equity inclusion at Arbor Circle. And what that means is that I am a champion for advancing our work on behalf of clients and staff related to improving inclusion, improving the diversity of our staff and clients, and then also advocating for the issues that create barriers for staff and clients related to equity and inclusion. So that could be everything from race and ethnicity to accessibility of spaces and feelings of, related to belonging and inclusion that staff or clients might feel in relation to connecting with us for services or in relation to their role as employees.
Ooh, that's a mouthful. And they say the only way to eat an elephant is a little bit at a time. So
Yes.
let's take that down just a little bit at a time. I did hear you say accessibility, and you know that's Dave and I's wheelhouse is that accessibility. What do you do for staff and for clients who need accessibility?
Well, we try to, it's an area of growth for us. We actually just, we have some conversations scheduled with disability advocates of Kent County coming up here in a couple of weeks to help us take a look at how we're doing and find ways to improve. But accessibility could mean everything from making sure our buildings are accessible or that we maximize the accessibility in facilities that we rent but do not own. It could be language accessibility. It could be making sure we have sign language interpretation or services for folks to be able to connect with us via phone or computer. It could be we have accommodations that we try to address for folks that are staff when they're attending our trainings if they need accessibility. So it is just really focused on providing the resources that folks need to engage fully with our services or to engage fully as staff in equitable ways.
And then what services do you provide at Arbor Circle?
Well, Arbor Circle provides many different services. We have 7 divisions that provide care in our communities. And of those 7 divisions, there's over 50 programs represented. So we do everything from early childhood, where we're doing community-based work with infants and toddlers. We're in daycare centers and organizations like that to support children in those settings. We do prevention and advocacy work around substance use prevention. And we also do your traditional outpatient therapy and treatment that most people are used to. We offer a number of programs related to community-based recovery, meaning we're going out into the community and supporting folks to address substance use issues. We have child and family services where we're providing family counseling in the communities, in homes, we're in schools. We have a shelter on site that serves youth ages 10 to 17 that are unhoused or in danger of being unhoused. We also have a number of programs for older youth who may be unhoused or seeking housing, seeking safe shelter. We do child welfare, adoption, and foster care. So who we are in the community depends on what community we're serving you in, and then what brings you into our, organization, depending on the type of support that you need. So it's a lot.
It sounds like it. We want to say thank you to Peggy Harris and to Jason Lee, who are watching us right now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do you feel right now that with the number of services that you offer, that you're reaching to like marginalized communities or biopic communities? Do you think that you're there? Do they know about you?
I feel like we have a good community. Well, we've been around for a long time, so I think folks are aware, but I don't think that's you never reach critical mass, in my opinion, in terms of building community awareness. It's always a journey, and if you think you're doing well, there's always space to improve and focus on something else. I think that we try to make sure that folks in marginalized communities or underrepresented communities are aware of our services. We do share out demographics about our services. And one of the things that's a unique demographic for us, and it uniquely positions us, I think, in terms of advocacy, is that over 50% of our clients are impacted by poverty significantly. And by that, I mean they have a household income of $5,000 or less. So wow. Poverty is something that is, and if you go higher in income, that would still represent poverty. That would put us in the 60 or 70 70s in terms of percentages. So the majority of the clients we serve, no matter what community we serve, we're serving them in. We have 5 brick and mortar locations. We are in the Grand Rapids area, which is kind of our headquarters where we do provide the majority of our services. But we also have offices in Allegan, Newaygo, Holland, and Muskegon. So we have bricks and mortar in those counties or those areas. And then beyond that, we have a footprint in 11 additional counties where we don't have offices, but we are providing services in those areas. But across our entire footprint, poverty is something that significantly impacts the majority of our clients. So whatever brings them into our door, whether it's a parenting group or they're taking that step towards recovery, the majority of them are navigating whatever life issues that they have and stressors that they have, also with the impact of poverty, which can have a tremendous impact on access, available resources, barriers. Now, I will say that poverty is a part of their story, but it's not the entire story. These are folks that are brave, that have gifts, that have talents, that have amazing strategies to navigate resources, but we can't underscore the impact or the barriers that poverty can present.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That I couldn't even imagine, being tossed in the middle of Grand Rapids and given $5,000 and saying, hey, you got a year to make that last. And just that piece of it. And I like to say these days, I have politics by memes, or those postings. But, somebody made the comment that the poor person can't afford to go to work, and the stereotypic, I'm just going to say stereotypic white business guys saying, just get a job. And the person said, no, they can't afford to go to work. It's like, what do you mean? That makes no sense. They're going to make some money. And it's like, how do you pay for daycare? How do you pay for transportation? How do you pay for clothes to wear? And it's like, it costs a lot to start working and to maintain working. And it's just like,
it's extremely expensive to be impacted by poverty. And those are decisions that you have to make on a daily basis. And it also limits your access and availability of things like healthcare. Like we all know that certain, there's limitations on insurance because of, and this is not a reflection on providers. Providers, whether sole practitioners or larger groups, they are in business to generate revenue, and the reimbursement rates provided by some plans like Medicaid plans are extremely low. So when the cost of providing the service is more than what you get reimbursed, it can be that creates access issues for folks. So it makes it difficult to navigate. And like you said, if me, getting a job means that I can no longer afford daycare or I can no longer afford rent, those are tough decisions that folks have to make when they desire to be viably employed, but their safety net, that the employment will not allow them to cover, the wages won't allow them to cover basic expenses. It's a real catch 22. So when we talk about wages versus housing and all those issues, there's a lot that goes into that.
Well, let's add some more pieces to that. You need to access work. You need all, clothing, housing, and you're bipolar and you have 2 children that are autistic, one nonverbal, one barely verbal, and you're trying to access work.
Yes. And then and the flexibility and support that you need, maybe some of us who have the benefit of working maybe salaried or more flexible jobs where we can navigate some of those things. Maybe the average person working in an hourly job in a service facing industry, when they're at work, they have to be at work, and they may have very accommodating employers, but they may not have the flexibility that they need to address all of those challenges as a parent, or to even, sometimes we find that in even seeking care, maybe maybe some of those issues that you mentioned, or even your own, might mean that you might miss an appointment or that you might be late. And then maybe you're told, well, you've been late too many times. We're dropping you,
Exactly. There's the
or
employers that have the, again, it's what, no reason, just a point system. And it's like, hey, we're
well, or
sorry.
even if you're trying to access
Exactly.
healthcare to address those issues, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you
Yeah.
no-showed, you missed an appointment, you've been late too many times.
Yep.
You're going to have to find another healthcare organization or another provider. That happens to folks.
Both directions. You
yes.
lose your job because you're again, the computer says you got too many points, and then you lose your provider, and then
then you lose your health care,
and
you can't. Yeah.
Catch 22 upon catch 22. Hello,
Yes,
Thurston.
but that
welcome,
also
welcome.
costs us money too, right? Like not having viable people in the workforce to contribute is a loss for our communities as well. Not children that potentially lose access to healthcare or other needed services because of red tape, or simply because maybe their parents have an insurance policy. Maybe they are working, but they're kind of the Alice working folks. They're making money, but they're not making enough. It's still pretty tight for them to meet basic needs. I can't afford that high deductible copay, so I have to ride it out. Even if I normally would go get healthcare, I don't have the $50, the $75, the $100, to pay. So even sometimes having access to healthcare, the copays, deductibles, and costs like that can make it inaccessible to utilize unless it's an extreme emergency.
We want to say it is now 16 minutes after the hour, and we want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Thurston, for contributing to our conversation. I have to say, Dr. Thurston, he will be coming on in August. And we want to say thank you to Carol Englishman, Faith Williams, and Doretha, the realtor of
the century.
Yeah. For tuning in with us. And if you are watching via GRTV 25, today is Tuesday. It is June 4th, and of 2024. And we want to say thank you for being such a loyal and faithful viewer. If you are looking for a job, we had interim healthcare on here for 5 weeks. And if you mentioned that you saw the show, you mentioned Dave's name, my name, or 100 Shades or Rolling on the Road, you will get a $300 sign-on bonus. And that includes even if you want to just take care of Aunt Bet. Yep, you can do it just like that. You can be the sole caretaker of Aunt Bet, and you will receive a $300 sign-on bonus. And if you are doing a self-pay, you will receive $100 off of your first self-pay. We also had Captain Dave, who came on and talked about how to make your home more accessible and safe to be able to age in place. And if you, from age, 2 to 92 or 102, if you're still at home, he'll come out and he will be the general contractor for those things that need to happen. And you will receive $50 off his services if you say that you mentioned it here from Rolling on the Road. So we want to say thank you for those who have been on before and who continue to support and enroll with us. Mm-hmm. And you offer mental health services as well, don't you?
Absolutely. That is the core of what we do.
I think that we would all need mental health services by the time you try to figure out, clothes, childcare, do I pay a copay or do I pay my light bill? That is a lot for one person to have to, think about if you're a single parent or even if you are a 2-parent home.
Absolutely. Many folks who are coming to us for support to address mental health or substance use challenges, poverty doesn't make those issues easier to address. It can exacerbate stressors. And so we are really fortunate that we get the opportunity to serve this population. And it also means that it gives us an opportunity to get a front row look at what some of the barriers are and how we can advocate for those things. So we're not in the housing business per se, but we know that many of our clients are experiencing the fallout of high rent or housing rental fees and things like that are exorbitant. So that is part of our work of one, just advocacy for clients in general, but then also looking at equity in other spaces and how that impacts our clients and our community.
Well, and with that, like because today my mind just keeps getting stretched. There was a different organization I was talking to earlier today that I thought like only did this, and I'm finding out they do this. And Arbor Circle, yeah, you kind of started with like this bigger picture, but then like how much of your effort, because I only thought I knew you did a kind of few other things, but now it's a lot. But the core of your mission in the mental health services, like how much percentage is that of your work?
That's kind of hard to quantify because we think of all of our services as addressing some aspect of wellness. Whether we're helping you provide housing, we're addressing wellness. Where we're helping you get connected to some parenting or therapy classes, parenting classes or group work around parenting. So we see all of the work that we do as an extension of supporting mental health and wellness. In 2023, in our fiscal year 2023, we served about 12,000 folks through. Now that could be many different iterations, but who we are to you depends on what community that you're in. Now, across all of the communities that we serve, we do have your traditional outpatient counseling. We do that in every single location. But for example, primarily we only do foster care and adoption on the lakeshore. So that's not a service that we provide in Kent County. So sometimes where you live and what door you enter, the programs that we serve may be concentrated in a specific community.
Why did you? Why was the decision made to only do it on the lakeshore and not do it in Kent County? Because it seems like you would need it more in Kent County than the lakeshore.
Well, some of that is contracts and grants and funding. Like, the child welfare system is kind of segregated or separated by county and by state. So we have contracts to serve in specific locations. Like you can't kind of jump the fence and say, I want to work over here. If you're receiving grants or funding to do that work, you have to do it in the community where the funding is provided or where the contract is. So that's why.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
We want to say thank you to Miss. I don't want to mess your name up, but it's spelled EWENDAPHA, last name Green. So I want to say thank you for tuning in. And I want to say thank you for all of those who are watching on Twitter. All right, my Xers, y'all just been coming in real strong. I thank you for all the hearts and all the likes that are popping up that I see here, and all the other platforms that we're on. How long have you been with Arbor Circle?
I have been with Arbor Circle as an employee since 2006. So I'm in my 18th year, 19 years. I started out there as an intern in 2005. And my first job at Arbor Circle was as a therapist working in our youth shelter. From there, I worked in a number of different leadership roles. I have done many different roles at Arbor Circle. And now I'm work on our admin team as the director of DEI. I'm a licensed professional counselor. And so that was really my start at Arbor Circle, was as a therapist.
Did you ever work with my wife, Melissa, there? Melissa Budzinski?
Oh yeah, that was way, way, way back in the day. But yes, I remember Melissa.
That was way back in the day. Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yeah, she does she get to be the wife-in-law if you are the husband-in-law?
It works. I don't know. We got to go to the whiteboard and figure that out. So, because yeah, Melissa got her start actually at the Child Guidance Clinic before y'all merged together to create Arbor
Yes.
Circle.
Yes.
But we
Arbor
don't want to
Circle.
do history lessons today.
Yeah. But yes, that is true.
I just for curious sakes, it's I went to your website and in addition to providing all that service, you have 26 openings. So like, are you guys having a hard time recruiting into this environment?
Yes, we are not unlike many organizations that it's been tough to hire in certain in certain roles. So yes, we are always actively hiring, particularly in client-facing roles for sure.
Shameless plug, folks, arborcircle.org. If you're a therapist looking for an awesome organization to work for, head there, /careers, because all kinds of opportunities, child and family, adult, outpatient, LGBTQIA youth, outpatient therapist, substance use folks, and they got some peer recovery specialists. That one's in Muskegon. We've got viewers in Muskegon. So folks, be of service, head to Arbor Circle, plenty of opportunities and then I don't know if it's time to pivot to the question of how hard is it? I've only heard this rumored that to get enough therapists who are people of color so that it's not just, nothing against us ordinary, average, middle-class white people, but if all your therapists are ordinary, average, middle-class white people, how do they relate to folks who come from different perspectives?
Well, I think the focus on being inclusive in our hiring is a really important one. And again, it's not a, there's no ceiling with that. So there's no number where I would sit back and say, oh, we have enough now. We can stop. When you talk about seeking mental health support or any kind of support when you're in a difficult situation, it's very important that whoever works with you, whether it's a therapist, a case manager, even the person that serves you at the front desk, it's very important that those are folks you feel like you can relate to. And in the space of therapy, for some folks, the fact that they would have choice in the identity, and when we talk about identity, we're not just talking about race. We might be talking about someone with lived experience in a number of different areas. Maybe for someone in recovery, they would want to work with someone who has experience with recovery. In our line of work, in the social work line of work, being a male is diverse because it's a heavily female dominated industry. So sometimes folks want a male clinician for themselves or for their sons. So yes, racial diversity is extremely important, and it's an area that we continue to focus on. But diversity is the needs that our client-facing needs are kind of in the eye of the beholder. What do they think would help them or their loved one connect best? And in some cases, wanting a clinician maybe that is Spanish speaking or a clinician that identifies as a person of color is something that a client might feel would help them in their in their course of treatment. Now, our demographics would tell us that about 75% of our staff are Caucasian. And so we know from that aspect that we're not matching totally the diversity of our community. So it's important for us to keep focusing in that area. And it's also important for us to be sure that all of our staff are supported and culturally responsive, right? No matter what color you are, you still have a responsibility as someone that's providing care to be culturally responsive, no matter what your racial identity or lived experience is. So however we show up, we want to, of course, it is the client's choice on what type of person they feel they would work best with. but it's incumbent upon us all as staff to be responsive and inclusive in how we connect with folks.
You know, one thing that people don't think about, but is important to me when, seeking mental health is the age of the person.
Absolutely. That's another important aspect of identity. I know when I first started, people were like, "You got kids? You look like you could be my daughter. My daughter, you look like somebody that went to." So,
Yes,
yes, that's
yes,
another important identity. And it goes both ways, right? Maybe a person that is a little bit senior in years may feel more like they can relate to someone that's closer to them in age. And the same is true for a young person, right? They may feel like they could relate to a caregiver or a clinician that is younger. So those are all the different and we have multiple identities. So you could look at me and say, or you've already told the group I'm an African American woman, but that's not all I am, right? So for some folks, spirituality is an important part of treatment, and they want to know that a therapist may be able to include spirituality as part of their healing journey. And not all areas of diversity or identity are visible, right? A person could, for example, have a disability that's not, you couldn't visually tell. So that's another aspect of equity and inclusion, is to not to make an assumption that because you can see something that's visual, you have to be culturally humble and culturally responsive to find out what's most important to the individual, because maybe what you see is not, what they would prioritize, but it's your job, to learn from them what they would prioritize in terms of their needs.
absolutely. It is now 4:31, and we want to say thank you so much for tuning in. And we have a responsibility, as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is to always include accessibility. And so we describe based off of our deaf-blind community. And so we have Enid Gaddis. We can't see necessarily spirituality, but she did include that. But I think I can kind of see something that's different about her on her face. But she is an African American woman who has braids in her hair that are cascading down to her shoulders. She is on a white background, has on a dark colored top. And we have Dave, who is a white male. Of course, his glasses and his ponytail is coming back. And he has a light to white colored background with a blue teal shirt on. And you know me, Euros, I am in my signature purple color with all of my accessories to match, and I have no hair. And if you are watching on GRTV 25, today is Tuesday. It is June. It is June 4th and 2024. And our topic today, because Maddie came in late, is we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the mental health. But as we found out, that Arbor Circle offers so many diversified services that it's not just mental health. It is all encompassing, and it is really dealing with the family holistically, or the individual. And Maddie is coming to us from Arkansas.
Oh, nice. Welcome.
In your work in the equity and inclusion space, how much do you deal with the headwinds of stigma within the mental health world, and the different communities take on even admitting you have a mental health issue to work on?
I think stigma is something that we see in a variety, in the diversity of communities that we serve for different reasons. Sometimes in BIPOC communities, it's like there's tension in regard to accessing systems. We don't tell people our business because maybe we feel like that's been used against us in the past, or we're distrusting because maybe we've received some very culturally, not culturally responsive care. And sometimes systems have done harm to people, right? If I've had my children removed after I told a therapist that I needed help, right? The next time somebody suggests that I go see a therapist, I may associate that relationship with me no longer having custody of my children. If I
Yep.
did not have, if somebody's seeking our help, maybe in a school from a school-based referral, and I myself was the victim of bullying or educators didn't listen to me when I was trying to get help for my child. So systems, people sometimes have, well, I won't even say it's not irrational. People have lived experience where they have
Right.
experienced harm within systems. And maybe it's not your system, but it is a system that you represent. And so sometimes when people come to you or come to us and they have concerns, even if they've never had our services before, we have to be very patient and supportive of that process because we know that systems have done harm, especially to underrepresented and marginalized populations. So that is definitely stigma around just accessing mental health treatment or stigma around systems is a big part of what folks have to deal with.
Now,
Yeah.
how often do you get involved? Let's say someone doesn't understand a culture and makes the decision to do, child removal. How would could a client access you to say, I don't think they understand my culture and they made this decision irrationally?
Well, well, that example is pretty complex because usually those decisions are made by the state and not by us. But most of us who are serving the public are mandated reporters, and so we may notice some concerns, but I could not ultimately make the decision for a child to be removed. That's out of my hands. But if I felt like a child was experiencing harm, I'll give you an example. Maybe my desire is that the family get help, right? Like I don't want the child removed. I'm just noticing that a family needs help or support, and my role as a therapist requires that I'm a mandated reporter. So in some cases, the issue may be an issue of poverty, right? Like if the child doesn't have enough food or is having some other issues, we don't want to criminalize poverty when
Right.
there are resources in the community that can address those issues. But if you do report something, that's why I'm saying there's systemic barriers. It may not be up to you how that information is used, but if you hold a professional license, you are required to, report. And so that's a very complex question. But one of the things that we try to do is try to make sure that we're part of advocacy efforts going on within our community to look at those things, right? Like there is a disproportionate number of children of color being removed in comparison to white children. So that means that's a system issue because that's a systemic issue because CPS doesn't usually report to itself. They're responding to complaints or to reports made into their systems by schools, by clinicians, by all different kinds of folks. So if there is disparity, and we know that there is, it's starting with how reports are made into the system, right? So it's not like, oh, CPS is doing all this stuff. No, they are investigating cases that come to them from public reach outs. And so that means that as a community, we have a responsibility and accountability to one another to make sure if we're serving community, we're doing work in community, and we have to be working on these issues collaboratively. But we know that in some cases, that stigma, one negative encounter can mean decades of people not wanting to engage or generationally passing down the fear of systems engagement, even though things could have changed. Like I could have had one bad experience at a school 20, 30 years ago, and now my child is in that school, and I still hold that fear that something could happen, even though none of those people are there. That structure represents a system. And so it's important to think about that. And in being culturally responsive, like you said, Dr. Kimberly, there is no way that we can be culturally competent in every culture. It is impossible. Like I might say I'm African American. I do not vouch for all Black people. I cannot speak for all Black people. There are many cultures and cultures within cultures one of the first things I realized when I started working as a therapist nearly 20 years ago was it was great that I shared the racial identity of many of my clients at the time. But one thing I did not have in common with them that they could not, we didn't know just from initially meeting each other is that many of my clients were single, were single mothers. I was not a single parent. I had never lived in a single parent household. So my paradigm about life was totally different. So they had some things to teach. I had some things I had to learn from them about what motherhood and parent, like we were both mothers. We had all of these things in common, but I could not say that I experienced a childhood from a single parent perspective or that I experienced being a parent from a single parent perspective. So I had to lean in and let them teach me what life was like. So we have to focus on being culturally humble, which means our clients have something to teach us. And it's our responsibility to learn, kind of check our privilege and see where our bias shows up so that we can address it and recognize that as working in a system, you have a certain amount of power and privilege, and you may have the ability to give or withhold resources. And so even though you may say, little old me, I wouldn't hurt a fly, you represent a system and there could be a power differential that is at play. So it is absolutely incumbent upon us to be culturally humble, to be checking our own bias, and to be addressing systemic barriers that our clients might face and not taking it personally if they say, I don't trust you, right? Like we show up at somebody's house, we want them to tell us our life history and they're like, I don't want to talk about that. Well, good, because I would be hard to talk with a total stranger about lots of different things. So being a caregiver at any level requires a lot of cultural humility and assuming the posture of a lifelong learner. We always have something to learn. Like as long as you all have been working within the disability community, that can be both a strength and a liability because you have the professional and lived experience. We can rely on that sometimes rather than leaning in and see what the person in front of us is about, right? Like I've worked with these kind of people before. I know, I can anticipate what they're going to say. We always have to be slowing down and appreciating the culture and the identity of the person in front of us, even if we have a lot of experience working with people from similar identities, or we share that identity. When we get too confident in that, that's when we have the possibility of doing harm or unintentionally maybe having somebody feel disrespected because we made some assumptions rather than learning from them.
You said a mouthful right there. I mean, it was just like racing. But we want to say hello to Vertanji, who is in Detroit. Thank you so much for tuning in. She said hello back to you. And we want to say hello to Tanya Wilkins. She is in Texas. So good afternoon to you as well. You said a mouthful. When you talked about, yep, we both are mothers. But you said not even growing up, nor experiencing being a single parent. That was something that my daughter and I always had this big rift where I couldn't tell her anything because she said, you don't know what it's like to be a single parent because you've always been married. Mm-hmm. So you don't know what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling. And I said, this is true. I said, but I'm not talking to your singleness. Tanya says, hey ladies, hey Dave. And I would have to tell her that I'm speaking to her at woman to woman, not situationally, but how she may experience something emotionally. And I said, because there are many women who are married and yet live like a single parent.
Well, absolutely. I think the point is when you're in particularly, I think the dynamics of a family relationship is a little bit different because the insight is different. But just to touch on what you said, as somebody in a professional helping role, your job is to see the world from the client's perspective and help them mine the data, mine the resources that they have. And so even though, you may not agree, I may not agree that, I may not agree in all situations, But in my attempt to respect their lived experience, it's important that I know that that is something different. It's also important for me, this is where we can only, control and kind of check ourselves, that I might have some bias about, that I need to deal with based on how I grew up. Like, right? Like, two-parent household, that's all I ever knew. Kim, you and I have similar stories. My father was a superhero in my eyes, and so I stand as a beneficiary of a father that was very present, not perfect but present. And so, if I could, I would be on a personal mission to increase the engagement of fathers because they experience discrimination too. That's a whole nother broadcast. Right.
Yep.
But the idea is that I have benefited from having my father and other strong male role models. So sometimes when I had clients who were like, I don't need, it don't matter where he's at. It's not, it's not a big deal. I would have to sit with that for a bit because I had some experience that they did not, but I also had to respect the fact that because, it's like describing a unicorn to someone who's, if you haven't experienced that, or that's not a value that you have, it's good to know that because then I could be forcing my perspective onto someone, and that's not helpful for building what we call a therapeutic alliance. First, I got to sit back and learn, what has your lived experience been like before I superimpose mine on and say, that's the best. That may not have been available to you, right? That might have not have been safe for you. So when we take a step back, we pump the brakes and we learn about the client and what they value, we may have the opportunity down the road for them to explore what a healthy relationship might look like in partnering and parenting. But if we come out the gate and they experience us as judgmental, then we never get that opportunity. We never get that opportunity to explore other options if we don't build that trust and that alliance. And at the end of the day, the client is in the driver's seat. If they choose not to focus on that, even though you think it would be helpful, you have to respect that and still move forward. But I think some people mean well, but when they don't slow down and learn and listen, then that's sometimes how people vote with their feet, right? Like they just stop showing up, they stop coming, they stop responding to your calls and your texts. They may not always say you're fired or I don't want to work with you anymore, but they will disengage. And sometimes you think, but it's like, no, maybe there was something that you were doing that could have impacted that client's building that therapeutic alliance, building that rapport. And we don't always get the benefit of knowing that. We just think, oh, they just stopped coming. But, being culturally responsive and how you engage is really important.
Well, she has taught me a lot as it comes to engaging and helping. And, one thing for me with the lived experience with the wheelchair, we were laughing about this the other day. My daughter says, you could have a sale for the number of wheelchairs that you have and that I've gotten. I've been in the wheelchair 11 years. So, of course, I've tried out so many different ones. And now I'm down to the manual and my Bentley, the one that I'm in right now. And I have to tell people all the time that just because we're in a wheelchair, we have different needs. We could be in a manual wheelchair. However, they have one for someone who has a spinal cord injury, one who's, as I call myself, a vertical half-aplegic. We have a different type of wheelchair. I was laughing because I was on a website today and I just shook my head because I can always tell by the wheelchair whether that person is a wheelchair user or whether they got a model and put them in a wheelchair to take
Yes.
So I just ended up laughing and I said, oh my God, that is definitely a model because anybody who was in that wheelchair, first of all,
would not be sitting like that.
I don't even know where they got their wheelchair from. Where did they get that from? So I just kind of look at it. But one of the things that she taught me, I'm going to add a little caveat to what you just said about having biases, is everyone who has some sort of dis, and it doesn't have to be physical, but there are 1,683 words that begin with the prefix dis that we all have experienced at any given time. And when you start to dismantle, there's this word, your disses, you find out that we have more in common with our disses than we don't. And then number two, which is the big one, either I was benefiting from me having this disc or somebody else was benefiting from having the disc.
Absolutely.
And I don't want you to dismantle my disc because I was making this work for me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's where, she and I would fall out. So it was not that because my experiences were different,
Sure.
where my dad was, everybody knows how my dad felt about me and how I feel
Mhm.
about my daddy. You know,
Mhm.
Dave was like, oh my God, I know, yes.
Mhm.
How he felt, how we were always together, the things that we accomplished. And um, she doesn't have that relationship like that with her dad, never has. And has, no matter how many times, I've said, well, me and my dad, we fell out and this happened. And so here's some things that you can try. It was like, whatever I had, it was always, but that was you. That was you. And it's not going to work for me. But you didn't even try. And it's like, but she used her disses as a way to navigate, if you will. It works for
Well, it
me.
is a lens, right? Like it is a lens, and it's a very powerful one. It does shape you in some ways that you don't even know until you have certain experiences. You don't realize
Mhm.
how things that's always been part of your environment, or that maybe that you've always lacked in your environment. You don't realize how powerfully those things have shaped you, right? And my husband says all the time, more is caught than taught. So nobody sits
That
down and
part.
says, this is the lesson for today on whatever. It's like we are in community in our environments, and we pick up stuff that we were never taught, and we carry it with us. And sometimes very profound things, either positively and maybe sometimes not so positively, have to happen for us to come full circle and say that is what, despite what our mouth may say, when we have certain experiences, our behaviors kind of play out what our lived experience, or um, maybe even our bias. And everybody has bias. If you have a brain, you have bias. It's based on your lived experience. It's
Mhm.
simply a preference or a predisposition based on how you grew up and based on what your culture is like. The key is to be aware of what some of those um, might be, so that you can mitigate the negative impact of what those might be in relationships, especially um, professional helping relationships, where you might have a little bit of power and it's not an equal, it's not a relationship of equals.
Heather Kitson, thank you so much for watching. I'm not sure if she's still in Germany or if she's in Greece, but I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. I think for me, and Dave has been a witness to this, where people will come up to me in the wheelchair like, oh my gosh, you're so strong for being in the wheelchair. I'm not strong like you are, so I can't do anything. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you know how my day started? Do you
Well, I
know?
think too, there's sometimes in working with clients with different abilities, I've come into, there can be this stigma around, some folks have embraced, their whatever experience brought them to having that disability. They've embraced it as part of their identity, and they're not sad about it. Like they feel very empowered by that identity. And so when folks assume, oh, this is horrible, this is, it's like you're making an assumption that that person is not a whole person just because their body may be differently situated than your own, or they may have a mental health disability. It's like that's where, kind of turning down the volume on your bias and listening and learning, like, how does that person view their current station in life, and operating for that from that vantage point, or making assumptions even about how you assist or help that person. Like they need you to do so many things, and you're not even asking or waiting to take a cue from them. There's so many ways that society has conditioned us that a person in a wheelchair, a person with a visible disability is somehow more fragile or has less agency. And that's just simply not, that's just
I
simply
think
not
one,
true.
I got in trouble. I was supposed to be behaving myself. We were at Noodles. I don't know if you remember this. We were at Noodles, and Tommy Allen and I were just out there having a great time. We had gone live, came in a great mood, and one of the yeah, so it was a fundraiser. So one of the persons came up to me with three people, and she touched me on my arm, and she says, "Oh my gosh, I just want you to know, I mean, it's just so wonderful that you came out tonight and you look really beautiful. But I am so sorry that you're like this. And it's a shame that you're just so pretty and you're in that wheelchair." And Tommy was like, "Oh crap, let me go get Dave." Because in her eyes, and it was almost that moment like, don't do it, Miss Sophia. Miss Sophia, don't do it. And it's like, get my chilling out of here. Yeah. Dave came flying over immediately, but not before a couple of words came out of my mouth. I don't want them not to give. And I was like, but Dave.
But that's a great example, because sometimes when you take up space, when people marginalize you like that, then it's like, "Ooh, what's wrong with her?" Or why is, why did I get all why did I get all that? Like, then we want to project, that person's use of their agency to correct us. Then we're feeling some kind of way, or we feel disrespected or offended that a person, like if a person tells you who they are and how they feel, now all of a sudden we're like, well, that was a lot, or that was extra. It's like,
Right.
no, it's not.
Right. Yeah, and those stereotypes and fears and myths about disability, and again, with Dr. Kimberly, the intersectionality, you throw in some race and you throw in gender, and like pity sells, that we try to sell justice and inclusion. But if it was like, "Oh, give us money because this poor Black lady in a wheelchair needs help," it's like we'd make all kinds more money. But all we're doing is we're playing off those fears and stereotypes of other folks as, "Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that non-disabled white guy helping the Black lady in the wheelchair." And it's just like, so.
And how we share those stories is so important as organizations, because it's part of our legacy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we don't put any logs on that fire of
he definitely,
the only word that comes to mind is a bad word, but it's just the negatives that, again, those ruts are so deep in our brains, because we have been saying those stories. Well, since the beginning of humanity, we've been telling negative stories about disability. And they're a burden on us, because we got to start running from the group next down the road, and not a road, is before a road, downstream from us, because they're coming. We got to go. And, "Oh, sorry, Kimberly, we're all too tired to carry you anymore, so we're going to leave you behind." And the sadness is the United States Supreme Court 25 years ago said that, and that was in their case about assisted suicide, that it was honorable to leave people behind. And it was just like, what? In this day and age, to see somebody as burden and making those judgments about, again,
Incredible.
If you see Dr. Kimberly down the hallway, if you have vision, and you see, you can have all kinds of stereotypes that come to mind. And then when you start realizing, the incredible work she has done in her wheelchair, it's not about her wheelchair, it's about her, the person who she is. But back to what you were saying, Enid, is like, people don't take that time to really get to know other folks and focusing on that curiosity.
And we do harm with that. You're right. It really excludes valuable contributions from people within our community. And
Yeah.
then sometimes when we say that we're open to feedback, but then when we get feedback that is very direct, sometimes we want to dismiss it and put the person, say that person was angry or that's not what I meant. But you all both, I'm sure, know that there's a difference between intent and impact. And if you step on my foot, it hurts, whether you meant to step on it or not. And we don't often want to deal with the impact of some of these behaviors, some of these words, some of this posturing. It is about the impact. So if your impact does harm, you should examine it and make changes, regardless of your intent. If the impact of how you engage causes harm, you need to work on it. And it's not it's not the individual that you harmed responsibility to serve that up on a plate that's palatable.
Right.
That impact really, because we tend to judge ourselves based on our intent, and we tend to judge others based on their impact. So if it hurt, right, but we don't always, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt at times, but we don't always extend that to other folks. The impact of behaviors like that woman could have been very well-meaning, but the impact that it had is real, regardless of her intention. The impact is what we have to deal with. And when we don't deal with impact, we center the needs of the dominant group, whatever that dominant group is. If it's able-bodied people, if it's
right.
if it's whoever's dominant in that incident gets centered when we don't focus on impact, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and
hold on one second. Bertaji said this is a good show, and Tanya Wilkins said this is good, and I guess for me, and this is what I said to Dave in the moment. I said, Dave, it's not that she said it. It was the fact that there were 5 of them. They were in a huddle having a conversation. They kept looking over at me, and I knew that they were going to say something. I really tried to prepare myself, de-escalating it, taking the air out of the balloon. But when you have 5 people and you are in my manual wheelchair, if I'm sitting, I'm in a seated position, then you have 5 able-bodied people who are standing over you.
Yes, and think about how that feels.
And so here she comes, with 5 people, and they're all standing over me and around me and saying, yeah, we want to know. Like, it is a shame. I mean, here they are just co-signing with her that my beauty, whatever talent, whatever intelligence was being wasted because I was in this wheelchair. And they just felt so sorry. And you know what, we got to write a check, for this to help this out. Well, I told her, now, how would I sound if I said, you know what, you sure are ugly for walking around.
Right. Yes.
But I love the way Dave did it. Oh, we want to say thank you for tuning in to Geraldine Betts. Tanya says, that's good. Our assumption can impact someone else very negatively, even when we think our intentions are good.
Well, and
Exactly.
folks, check your intentions, check your intent, because
be open to feedback, right?
Exactly.
Like maybe you have a blind spot. Where we have bias, we have blind spots. So when someone brings something to our awareness, yes, it can be a little embarrassing or feel a little off-putting, but we have to read that mail, right? If we want to do better, when we get feedback, we have to reflect on it. That's the only way to make positive change. Nobody gets it right all the time. Even folks that have we all have various identities that can be marginalized at any point. We don't get it right all the time, right? We just don't.
Yep.
But I appreciated Dave in the moment. I really did, because he just came over and he put his hand on my shoulder and started rubbing my back. So it's gonna be okay. And what's going on here? And she was like, almost justified. All I said to her was, and then he felt me tense up, and then he was just like, down, breathe. She's like, all I said was, that, wow, it's a shame, we felt bad because she's so pretty and she's in this wheelchair. So then it's like, okay, is your assumption that everyone who's in a wheelchair is not attractive? I mean, it was so loaded. I mean, where do we even begin with this?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
When we look at the clients, they may come to you, we could probably have the same type of bias. Well, oh, you're single, you got a baby. Well, why you just didn't take birth control? I mean, what's going on? You knew
That,
baby.
or think about someone with a substance issue, right? Like, just stop, right? Like, there's so many ways that we can do harm with our words and with our actions. We do have to stop. We really do have to stop and examine where that might show up for us. If we don't know, we need to gain some awareness because we can't, we have to think about and reflect on, or use some trusted individuals to help us identify. We need people in our corner that will give us tough feedback in a respectful and loving way, because sometimes we don't know, unfortunately, until things like that happen, or until somebody points something out. Sometimes it takes incidents like that for us to, it shouldn't, but when it does, we need to reflect on what that meant instead of just dismissing it as, oh, she was just real extra and mean or whatever. Like, if they walked away from that encounter and did not examine their own behavior, that would be very unfortunate. That would be extremely unfortunate if they did not learn or glean anything from that.
Right, because I was just going to say back to the deep ruts, that in Dr. Kimberly being upset, they can just, as they walk away, as well, she's just still upset because she's in a wheelchair. And it's like,
exactly.
Again, we can easily dismiss what anybody says, and if we want to, and again, where we're on to like the fifth next episode we could do together, when we talk about being curious, not judgmental. And being curious and listening to other folks. And so, Enid, we're going to have you back for about a month. Hope you don't mind. Your supervisor these days, I got to reach out to them. I'm just,
Kristen is my supervisor.
All right, Kristen, we just need Enid to have some release time to. And folks, I'm just going to say a quick shameless plug. You see, stop the, at part, but arborcircle.org. Check out their many programs here in West Michigan. If you're looking for a great place to work, they even have a posting for an intern. So arborcircle.org, check it out. Awesome organization, doing awesome support across all ages and different issues that they're working on. So check them out, arborcircle.org.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't even want to say, I'm not even going to ask you about final words, because we're just going to put a comma here and not a period, because you named off so many different services, and I can almost see us doing, 2 shows so that we could get everything kind of in, do a Tuesday and a Wednesday.
Come back and talk about services. Yeah.
But today we basically kind of gave an overview. So we appreciate those who had comments, and those that I didn't have an opportunity to read. Please, don't dismiss us, but we wanted her to get out as much as she could and, give some of the big overarching questions and responses. But we'll do this just like we did with Gift of Life Michigan Day, where we go like department by department, and we say, okay, now this one is what they take care of, and if you need it, and this is where you go and you get things done. So we'll take care of that. And definitely it'll be so much smoother than it has been this last couple of weeks or so.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Awesome. Absolutely. It is now 5:09, and we want to say thank you so much for tuning into Rolling on the Road with Dr. Kimberly and Dave, where we stayed at home today. And here we go. We were right here Even though
But
we
they
talk
serve all around
all
here.
of this right here,
Yeah.
just like Interim does. So we're just so excited to be able to have you and to,
Thank you.
I mean, we learned a lot, gave us some things to think about as we continue to move, towards our show, future shows. And we usually don't have too much of kickback. I think we all learn so much from each other, and everybody has an opportunity to share their point of view. And that's what we have really loved about this platform of 4 years, is that everybody has an opportunity to have a voice, regardless of who you are, whose you are, what you choose to do, what you identify with. You always have an opportunity to come here to Rolling on the Road and to talk about what it is, about your lived experience that you want people to know about and help
Awesome.
everyone to understand.
It's awesome.
So we got a lot to, got my mind percolating, guys.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Until next week, we will say stay safe, and it's a little warm. Make sure you stay hydrated. And on next week, we will have Pastor Jonathan Abney Austin, who is the daughter of the illustrious Bishop William C. Abney. For some of you folks who don't quite remember him, trust me, you'll know by the time we get finished with the show. And
There's a street even named after the bishop.
it sure
Yes,
is.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And he has a school.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'll be exciting to catch up with her to see where she is and how she has furthered the legacy of the late Bishop William C. Abney. So we'll see you guys on next week.